everybody, and welcome back to my channel. At the end of last year, a much hyped remake of a beloved science fiction franchise was released. That franchise is Dune. I know the title alone will grind a few gears, so I'm here to explain why I think the original 1984 adaptation deserves more love, and hopefully I shall be able to get my point across. Without further ado, on with the review. I was always aware of the Dune franchise growing up. I read the original novel when I was younger, and one of my relatives was a huge fan of the 1984 adaptation, and often made references to it. I did enjoy reading the book and watching the original film as a small child, but it never quite gripped me like my family members until recently, as I watched the Dune original and remake, then reread the original novel. For those who are interested, but have not yet indulged in the franchise, just a warning, there are spoilers ahead, so skip this video if you don't want anything in the franchise to be revealed to you. Since both the films focus on the first novel, that is what I too shall be focusing on in this video, since I don't think the later novels will add much for this specific video. Dune is a science fiction novel, written in 1965 that centers around a character named Paul Atreides. Within the novel's universe, there are 4 planets that are relevant to the story that hold the people of different houses. The planet where most of the story's events take place on is Arrakis, home of the Fremen people and the sandworms, and source of a highly coveted substance known as spice. This substance has hallucinogenic properties and is considered sacred to the Fremen people who live underground, but is highly precious and valuable to the Imperial House and those who are ruled by it, who mine the spice on Arrakis, as it allows their Spacing Guild navigators to engage in interstellar travel accurately and safely. Paul Atreides was born to a member of the Bene Gesserit, a religious order who possess superhuman abilities such as clairvoyance and something known as the Voice, where one can influence someone to do as they command, with simply a statement said in the right pitch. His mother Jessica was the Reverend Mother's prize pupil, and his father was the Duke of Atreides. However, members of the Bene Gesserit are instructed to bear daughters for fear of producing the Kwisatz Haderach, Space Jesus if you will, but clearly his mother did not heed to this instruction. Because of this, he is a huge liability to the Emperor and the level of control he has, and the balance of the planets with respect to his reign. This is because the Bene Gesserit intended on creating a Kwisatz Haderach that they can easily manipulate, but Jessica obviously betrayed them. This puts Paul's whole family in danger. The story follows him trying to learn how to use his powers with the help of his mother, and the Fremen, in order to end the current government's tyrannical reign. The first point I will make about both films is that there's a noticeable difference in quality of effects. The effects in the 1984 adaptation are very good for the time, but are of course quite dated. It was released over 35 years ago now. I will say the non-practical effects such as the Holtzman shields were shockingly good for the time, even if they look a bit Minecrafty. The sandworms in the 1984 adaptation look surprisingly convincing as well. I also really like the opening sequence, where we get a charming little animation explaining the planets that will be relevant later on. Now, while I have some issues with the Dune remake, I will give it this. It is visually stunning. It looks beautiful, and the landscape of the planets are very believable, and it really is gorgeous to look at, and due to the improvements in technology, the world just seems a lot bigger in the newer version. The acting is very good in both adaptations of the film, even if it was a bit corny at times in the original. However, I found that the 2021 film drags the plot out too much, and it comes across like they just wanted to make a sequel. Sure, the film has interesting moments, but there isn't really a climax because it only reaches about halfway through the story before the film's end. Because of this, the 1984 adaptation was far more engaging in my opinion, as they actually got to the point with the story, even if they missed some details of the plot out. Something I did appreciate in the 2021 adaptation, however, is that they kept a lot of the cultural references in from the book. The language, culture and appearance of the Fremen people is heavily based on Arabic and other traditionally Muslim cultures. All direct references to this have been removed from the 1984 adaptation, which I thought sucked when I rewatched it, as that was always an interesting aspect of Dune to me. You wouldn't really expect such a large aspect of religion to be used in a Western science fiction novel, so I've always thought how Frank Herbert incorporated that into his universe was cool. They still refer to Paul as Muad'Dib, but it just didn't fit like in the remake. Another thing in relation to this is the characterization of Duncan Idaho is way better in the remake. Idaho is the swordmaster of Atreides, and is described in the novel as having curling black hair and darker skin, and is supposed to be a charming kind of character. He wasn't really featured in the 1984 adaptation, and I didn't really recognize him from his description. I think the casting choice of Jason Momoa was much better in the remake, and the way that he is portrayed is far more accurate to the novel in terms of personality. I think Timothée Chalamet is a decent actor, but I really don't know what I think about his portrayal of Paul in comparison to Kyle MacLachlan. While I knew who Chalamet was before watching the remake, I didn't know very much about him, apart from the fact that a lot of girls my age find him very attractive. I get that it's Hollywood, and of course they're going to cast a sex symbol in the lead role, but because this was the only knowledge I had of him, I didn't know what to think when I realised he was going to be Paul when the film began, and this isn't to take away from his skill as an actor. I think he did a good job. Paul is meant to be a teenager, and is often referred to as a boy by characters much older than him in the novel, but this, along with the way that he is written to be a bit more whiny in the remake, comes across like the only reason he survives the ordeals he goes through is because he is Space Jesus, compared to being inexperienced and struggling yet proactive and capable in the original adaptation. Although of course, this means it does suffer from the 25-year-old teenager curse many old movies fall into. Another thing that the remake lacked was the more interesting and developed dynamic between the Baron of the House of Harkonnen and his nephew, who, might I add, is played by Gordon Matthew Thomas Sumner, aka Sting from The Police. The Baron and his nephew are just kind of there in the remake, as evil figures in the shadows, compared to this strange, sadistic and grotesque duo. A final thing that sucked was that the original film didn't have the epic throat singing that was featured in the remake when the Sadako were introduced. Overall, while I think both adaptations have their faults and merits, I think the original film had a lot of spirit behind it, whereas while the remake certainly isn't a bad film by any means, it came across as a bit hollow to me, and the original film is villainized way too much. I think a lot of the main issues with the film came from the fact that it was made in a time where people were not as knowledgeable about other ways of life, and there was a lot of cultural and political unrest, as well as it being shoved around so much, which I will elaborate on later. Both adaptations feature a surprising amount of well-known cast members. Other than the aforementioned stars, the 1984 adaptation also featured Brad Dourif from Child's Play and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Sir Patrick Stewart of Star Trek fame, and Jack Nance from Eraserhead. The 2021 remake features Rebecca Ferguson, who also starred in Doctor Sleep and The Greatest Showman, as well as Zendaya, who looks beautiful in her role as Chani. The remake is clearly influenced by the 1984 remake as well in terms of cinematography, set design and costume design, even if they did up the quality. Another thing to note is why each film was made and the reception to both films. There had been a few adaptations in the works before the 1984 adaptation was made, but they failed. A good example of this was a failed project that became the subject of a 2013 American-French documentary, Jodorowsky's Dune. I have linked an article about it in the description down below, and I really encourage you to check it out if you're interested in lost media. The film passed from director to director until Eraserhead's David Lynch was settled upon in 1981, just before the 9-year Film Rights Act was about to expire. On the other hand, director Denis Villeneuve stated in an article with Empire Online that there are parts that I love and other elements that I am less comfortable with, in reference to Lynch's Dune. So it's like, I remember being half satisfied. That's why I was thinking to myself, there's still a movie that needs to be made about that book, just a different sensibility, which suggests that he was passionate about the story and wanted to see it adapted in a different way, which is fair enough. I just would have done some things differently if I was the director, but I do understand that he was trying to improve upon Lynch's film, and I think he did a decent job. The 1984 adaptation apparently only made about just over $30.9 million back of its $40 million budget, whereas the 2021 remake had a budget of $165 million and made over $353 million back at the box office worldwide. Just based off the IMDb scores, public consensus is clear. The 1984 version only got a 6.4 out of 10, whereas the 2021 version got an 8.2. In my personal experience, the people around my age I have discussed this with had either never heard of Dune beforehand and assumed it was going to be like Star Wars, or had read the books as well as viewing the remake, but had no idea the 1984 adaptation even existed. I'm aware that there was also a mini-series based on Dune that was made at the turn of the century, but I haven't watched it and don't think it's relevant to this specific video. I will stand my ground though. While the 2021 adaptation is not a bad film by any means, the 1984 version will always have a place in my heart as a science fiction film, despite its multitude of issues. I also just really like David Lynch's films in general, so I'm very biased. My original idea and draft for this video was far more critical of the 2021 adaptation of Dune, but after revisiting the original film and book, as well as researching a lot of the background, I started to sway a bit. I think the main issue with the remake was simply pacing, which obviously had an effect on the writing. I just think they should have gone the Lord of the Rings route and made the film 3 hours long. I know I would have watched the whole thing. Apart from that, in terms of adaptation and overall filmmaking, the 2021 film is far superior, but that doesn't mean that the 1984 film should be lambasted for what it lacks. I think it's still a good film. I know there is a sequel coming out next year. I will probably watch it regardless of my skepticism, so I might change my mind after watching the second one and being able to view the films as a whole, rather than as one film being one very drawn out piece of the puzzle. Well, that's all for this video. What did you think of Dune? Have you seen both versions or read any of the books? Which version did you prefer, if any? Don't forget to like and subscribe, and leave any thoughts you had in the comments down below. And as always, thanks for watching.
Nothing like a polo to ease my mind. With polos by my side, I'll always shine. The blue and green ones are my favorite kind, but I'll eat the colored ones from time to time. Cause polos is life, 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 polos is life. Sleep all night.